no one wants to hear certain words. Mr. Medlin, this will fails. It cannot be probated. But I heard those words just a short time ago here in town. A gentleman named Alfred Borg moved to Concord with his wife from New Jersey. They brought with them wills that they had made in New Jersey. I'm sure those wills were fine in that state. But they never changed them when they moved to North Carolina. Mrs. Borg died. I took the will over to the clerk of Superior Court, who read it over, and as I was afraid I was going to hear, turned it down and could not probate the will. Now, Mr. Borg has given me permission to tell this story around town because it's pretty important. We went through about 6 months of detective work, calling back to New Jersey to try to find the witnesses to that old will. And after about 6 months, we had almost given up. We made a couple more phone calls to law firms up there and finally found one lead of someone who thought they knew where one of those witnesses lived. After a few more weeks, we found our witness, who happened to know where the other witness lived. After all that time and money and worry, we got that will probated. But we were extremely lucky to do so. Had Mr. Borg not been able to preserve that will, most of the money in his estate would have gone to another relative. And he needed that money. He very much needed that money to live the rest of his life in some degree of comfort. I tell you all of that to let you know that we were very, very fortunate to avoid a serious family fight and a very, very expensive lawsuit. Part of why I talk to groups is because I don't like lawsuits taking up the assets of any family. And I sure have seen it happen way, way too many times. That's what a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how to avoid that very, very expensive courtroom. When I used to talk to a group like this, I'd always start off by asking who in the group has a will. And about half the group would, and I don't ask that question anymore. I just go ahead and tell everybody, everyone here has a will. Whether you made it at a lawyer's office or whether the state legislature made it for you, you have a will. But I will tell you this, if the state legislature made your will for you because you didn't make up a written will at a lawyer's office, that will made by the legislature is not what you want. It's never what anybody wants because the legislature spreads the money around pretty broadly and they take a real broad brush approach, and it's just not what's appropriate in most of the cases. When I bring folks into my office to talk wills, it's important that they know that their situation is unique. Every situation is unique. And I try to make sure that we always ask enough questions. People think I ask too many questions. I don't think so. I think we ask enough questions to get to what they really, really need and to find what their desires are and be able to make a meaningful decision about an estate plan. There are questions that a lot of folks just don't think to ask. For instance, younger people really need to ask in most every case who should be the guardians of their minor children. That's one of the most important decisions they can ever make. Because if they don't make that decision, and we like to have alternates named as well, if they don't decide who's going to be guardians of their children, the court system decides that for them. And often it's not what they would have wanted. A lot of times folks need to plan on some trusts to help out minor children or older individuals as well. And again, every family situation is different. So we try to ask those questions to see what's really needed in a particular case. A lot of times it is very important who's going to be the executor of a will. In other words, who handles the business, finds the assets, gets all the bills together, follows the will, follows those instructions, and makes sure everything happens. And without a good executor, it's real easy to wind up, again, with a family fight and spending money in the courtroom, money that was intended to go for another purpose. Everybody here has seen the family fight. I used to ask if anybody's seen a family fight. Well, every hand was thrown up immediately, and I don't ask that question anymore. I just assume you've all seen some difficult times in a lot of families around, maybe even your own. I do find certain things lend themselves to those problems over and over again. One of the main ones is a will taken off the internet, or taken off a form book, or a handwritten will. Folks, in a way I like handwritten wills. In a way I like internet wills because I make so much money off of them. They make such a mess. And they cause such big fights. And all the time that fight's going on, I'm charging a lot of money per hour. But I'm not serving people well without telling them that typically the form book will, the internet will, the handwritten will really aren't what you need. For one thing, the wording in those documents often is very, very broad, multi-state language. It is made to serve somewhat anybody, but it actually serves nobody's particular needs. And whenever that will is attempted to be probated and attempted to be followed, the courts give those words in the will exact legal meanings in North Carolina. Most of those forms are written in California or New York where the laws are different. And you try to apply that law here, a lot of times it really doesn't work. What it amounts to is that form will push the square peg of your legal needs, your estate planning needs, into the round hole of a form because somebody can make a quick buck. And that's about the only thing those wills are often good for. I often tell people the cheap, quick method is sometimes the most expensive piece of paper you'll ever buy. But it causes problems for other people later on. Causes a lot of problems for other folks. I also find a lot of difficulty with documents that are intended to solve problems that don't even exist. For instance, you read about or hear about that everybody needs a revocable living trust because they're going to have the same sort of problems as people like Elvis Presley or J. Paul Getty. Now, I hope all of you have the same kind of money as those folks. I hope you don't have as many enemies or lawsuits waiting to happen as they did. But often when I've attended those seminars or heard from people, they talk about the presenter saying, look what happened to these other estates. You know, half or two-thirds of the estate was eaten up by lawsuits. Quite frankly, most of us will never have to be concerned about a lawsuit after we die. We just don't live those kind of lives like the wealthy and the famous of the world to draw that kind of attention. And again, I do find that with the revocable living trust, most people gain nothing from it. They do spend thousands of dollars when they could have spent hundreds to accomplish all they really needed to get done. I gave this talk at another church a few weeks ago, a group a little bit bigger than this, maybe 30 people in the room. 4 different families had paid several $1,000s each for estate plans far beyond anything they could ever need. What they needed was to pay hundreds rather than thousands and get something that actually met their needs. So that again is something I find that it's just unfortunate with a lot of folks spending their hard-earned money on something they don't need. Also, I find people are sometimes reluctant to use the services of a financial planner or someone to help them with their money while they're alive, and also someone to work with me on making sure that their money passes appropriately at some time in the future through that will. There are many, many good financial planners around this area. We work with most all of them. And it's always a pleasure to see people set up how their money is handled and where it can grow well for them, and then for me to work with a financial planner to set up a plan that helps sometimes older individuals or minor children or grandchildren. It is good to use these opportunities that you have. Sometimes folks just bring me an existing estate plan. They say, well, it was made up years ago, or whatever lawyer made it up has died and we haven't had it reviewed in a long time. I'm always happy to review a plan to see if it still meets your needs. What I'm really trying to do is make sure that you, individually, remain in charge of your own money, your own estate, who gets what is yours when you're gone, rather than the government making that choice for you. Because again, we just have to be aware that that government plan, and there certainly is one for you out there, that it's not the right one. It is never what you would have decided on your own. Let me talk with you just a minute also about some papers that can assist with planning along with your last will and testament. One of those being a business power of attorney. Again, I hope nobody in here is going to be dying anytime real soon, but unfortunately, most all of us in our lifetimes are going to have some sort of serious illness or a bad car crash or something that's going to make it so we cannot handle our own business for a time. When that time occurs, it's awfully good to have somebody in your family, a friend or someone, to be able to handle your business for you as a business power of attorney. We all found out the hard way from hearing so many stories right after Hurricane Hugo. People were sometimes injured, and there were trees on their homes or other things went wrong, and they were in the hospital, couldn't make any decisions, and they had appointed nobody to make decisions for them. So again, it's very, very good to have somebody that can handle your business for you if you're not able to do it yourself. And make sure those people know your feelings, know your assets, and be able to make reasonable decisions for you. Along that same line is the medical power of attorney. You often hear it called a healthcare power of attorney. Again, we find out the hard way sometimes of watching what happens in other places. I expect everybody here remembers that sad case years ago of Terry Schiavo down in Florida. Young lady wasn't but about 30 years old and wound up in the hospital in a coma for a very, very long time. Family fighting. And again, you see this trend of what happens. Families fight when there's not a good plan in place. And that family fight went all the way up to the U.S. Congress and was heard all over the world. It could have been prevented with just a few $100s worth of legal work. And I always tell even very young people, terrible things happen to all of us at every kind of age. Go ahead and take that sort of planning real seriously. Had Terry Schiavo just had a medical power of attorney, someone could have made medical decisions for her after she could no longer make those decisions on her own. But again, we need to sit down and talk about those sort of things, because you have to be careful who holds that power for you. And whoever it is needs to know your thinking and know your philosophy about medical care. The last paper I always tell folks about is truly an end-of-life paper, and that is a declaration of a desire for a natural death. You often hear it called a living will. What it means is when you are truly terminally ill, that is, you will die from whatever illness you have, and you will never speak again, you cannot communicate, you're telling the medical community, no more heroic means to keep me alive. I'm terminally ill, I'm not going to know where I am anymore, no more treatment, just let me die. Pain medication, comfort medication only, let me die. There again, without that paper in hand, it can lead to major disputes in families and leads to the medical community not knowing what to do. Now remember, folks, that as you make these papers, a lot of times you'll never know these papers are being used. It's other folks, family members, or other people that work with you. They're the ones that are going to be the real beneficiaries of knowing what to do and what you intended. And you're keeping that indecision and that potential family fight from happening. Everybody here is familiar with one particular family fight. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King died, he left behind 4 little children, a grieving widow, the U.S. civil rights movement without a leader. And as we constantly read, those children are still fighting over that estate right now. Almost 45 years later, still fighting about that estate. That sort of thing happens constantly in this country. And I urge people, spend some time, spend some money to keep that from ever happening in your family. Let me share with you something I think pretty important. We know that being good stewards of our money is important in our church. We know that thinking forward is pretty important also. But I think the scriptures are rather clear about how we are to act toward each other and toward our families and how we're to take care of business. I'm going to read to you from Luke 15, verses 28 and 29, where Jesus is addressing a crowd and says, "Don't begin until you count the cost." Talking about building something here. Don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first getting estimates and then checking to see if he has enough money to pay the bills? Otherwise, he might only complete the foundation before running out of funds, and then how everyone would laugh. I'll take you to another scripture, one that I expect you've all heard, from Proverbs 31, 10 through 29. This is a scripture that you will often hear read at some lady's funeral, but I think it applies to all of us. If you can find a truly good wife, she is worth more than precious gems. Her husband can trust her, and she will richly satisfy his needs. She will not hinder him, but help him all her life. She finds wool and flax and busily spins it. She buys imported foods and brought by ship from distant ports. She gets up before dawn to prepare breakfast for her household and plans the day's work. She goes out to inspect a field and buys it. With her own hands, she plants a vineyard. She is energetic, a hard worker. She watches for bargains. She works far into the night. She sows for the poor and generously gives to the needy. She has no fear of winter for her household, for she has made warm clothes for everyone. She also upholsters with finest tapestry. Her own clothing is beautifully made, a purple gown of pure linen. Her husband is well known, for he sits in the council chambers with the other civic leaders. She makes belted linen garments to sell to merchants. She is a woman of strength and dignity, has no fear of old age. When she speaks, her words are wise, and kindness is the rule of everything she says. She watches carefully all that goes on throughout her household and is never lazy. Her children stand and bless her. So does her husband. He praises her with these words, "There are many fine women in the world, but you are the best of them all." Now granted, this is a reading generally directed toward ladies, but look at the deeper meaning, the broader meaning. It talks about how anyone is to view their gifts, their responsibilities, their acting as a grown-up is what it really is talking about, and handling business. And oh, what praise from God's Word for those who handle business wisely. I think we're told to be looking after our family business. And what we speak of today is certainly part of it. You see, your legacy is something you're making right now. And part of what we always talk about when folks are around us is how they handle business. You know, you can reverse engineer your life. A lot of us have already decided what we want said at our funeral. And all you do is live your life so as to let the people who speak at your funeral say those things you want said about you. Go ahead and do those things. Let people say them. And part of it is how you handle business. Because quite frankly, none of us really cares if someone talks about how big our house is at our funeral. We really don't care if they say, you know, David's car was the best sports car in town. It would do 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. No one cares about that. No one cares to hear those words. You know, he had the biggest. You fill in the blank. But we do care if folks talk about being responsible, taking care of family, handling business, making sure that we respected those who would stay behind us or respected those who would have to make tough decisions for us. Those things matter. It's important that we make those decisions, not let the government make those decisions for us, and not bring about something to happen that might really cause difficulty in our own family. Folks, a lot of times I can prevent these problems if somebody will just bring an existing estate plan or existing legal papers to me. Often those old errors or ways we can improve those documents just jump out at me. And if I see papers that are too old, I know a lot of changes that have happened in the law since those documents were made. I think there's also a responsibility of every one of us just to look around our own families, even extended family, and ask, who ought I be reminding? Look at your own estate plan. I've taken care of mine, now look at yours. We're family, we're friends. This is what we do for each other. We look after each other and try to make sure these things are handled. Now in just a second, I'm going to let all the group ask questions as much as you wish. And of course, Retha's been over here writing down all kinds of questions, and that I understand. Also, at the end of the program, if anyone here should want to have a simple, basic will made for them, we brought the necessary equipment along to make that basic will for you. It will be very basic, but to go beyond that point would require completion of some forms and some conferences at my office to make sure we get them right. If anybody wants a simple will made today, we're happy to do that for you. Now again, I want you to understand, I've been here with this group before. I know several of your members, and it's always been a pleasure to be around with this group. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions.